The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Going the Distance, Marketing and Communicating in the Shadow of COVID-19. Just want to take a minute to thank everybody for joining us here today. We know we have a lot of attendees on the line, and we appreciate all of the efforts that you are making on behalf of your communities. We know it's a very trying and unprecedented time, and so we thank you for attending today. And we hope that we will make it worth your while and give you a lot of useful tips as succinctly and concisely as we can. So my name is Melissa Caravella. I'm Vice President of Client Services at Creating Results. I'm joined today by Kimberly Hulett, President at Creating Results, and Chris Lukach, President of AKCG Public Relations Counselors. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. All lines have been muted. You can submit questions through the GoToMeeting control panel. If you click on the little questions panel that you see, there is a text box where you can input your question, and we will be answering as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. If we aren't able to get to every question, we will make sure that we post the questions and responses either to our website or somewhere where you can access them after the webinar. We're also recording the webinar. It will be sent to all of the registrants as well as posted online. So you will have access to the video as well as slides following the presentation. So as we get started today, we want to express that we understand that the communities that you're all serving need to protect the census and keep prospects engaged and ready to move forward once restrictions have been lowered to minimize the financial impacts on your communities. And so we're going to be focusing today specifically on communications and marketing. So from a communications perspective, responding to the immediate crisis, the reputational risk you may face in the coming weeks, internal communications, and thought leadership. And from a marketing perspective, how you can assess and pivot your marketing strategies, highlighting the benefits of community living, as well as some other considerations, and then time at the end to answer any questions that have come in throughout the webinar. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris to start us off on communications.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I know we have a PowerPoint that'll be popping up here just a moment here. So I'm going to talk about communications, and this is a very interesting time to be talking communications because the counsel I give today, I want to be clear that that we're time-stamping this. I have seen some interesting crises throughout my years in public relations consulting. Crisis communications tends to be a pretty core competency of my firm, AKCGs. I've seen heavy ones. I've seen ones that are packed with surprises and uncertainties. I've not yet seen one where the counsel we give on a Monday is different than the counsel we give on a Tuesday and different than the counsel we give on a Wednesday. So I just want to caveat that when we talk about managing this particular moment and what the expectations are around communications for COVID. We're in this interesting moment where sort of general strategy about addressing COVID is adapting from one of containment to acceptance. And with acceptance comes sort of mitigating the factors around it. That is to say that in the weeks leading up to this moment, a lot of the crisis communications challenge centered on whom do we notify? My facility has a confirmed case of COVID. Whom do we notify? Do we do, in partnership with our Department of Health, do we do contact tracing? Do we try and look back and see whom this individual might have been exposed to on our staff, or what other residents or volunteers or other audiences we serve might this individual have been exposed to? And we're sort of hitting the threshold where we're going to stop paying so much attention to this notion of contact tracing. We are, I think, as a nation, beginning to accept that countless people are going to be affected by COVID-19. And we're probably past the point where it's practical to report back on every case and contact trace every case. However, that is still largely a regional decision. That is still largely a regional expectation. that's being set. And the body that tends to be setting that expectation is the Department of Health. We want to look to our local Department of Health. One of the things you'll hear me say a couple times throughout my little portion here is this notion of transparency, being transparent, being comfortable with and prepared to over-communicate with our constituencies. That's absolutely the case here. And oftentimes, local departments of health may still be saying, we have a confirmed case in our county. It's case number 17. The individual who is affected is a 72-year-old individual that had exposure to this facility and this community and this store and this school on these dates. There's great value in knowing what our Department of Health is going to do, because if we're perceived as not sharing as much as our community expects, it can have that effect on goodwill. Now, remember, what is crisis communications after all? Crisis communications is about protecting the goodwill we've worked to instill among our key people, among the people most important to us. We know who those people are, and being transparent is a way to shore up that goodwill. We want to focus not on just communicating when we have confirmed cases of COVID or when we have suspected cases of COVID or presumptive cases of COVID, but we want to focus on the actions that we're taking. Keep that in mind as we decide when to communicate and with whom we're communicating. It's not just about saying we have a confirmed case, it's our first, it's our second, it's our third. What are we doing to support this individual? Have we properly quarantined this individual? Are we triaging people as they're beginning to show symptoms and helping to isolate them? Are we continuing to be humane toward this person and give them a valuable and meaningful experience as they continue to battle their diseases? What action are we asking the audiences to take? We're all probably, many of us on the call, are past the point of restricting visitors because we've already done it. But if not, have these confirmed cases change the way we welcome visitors, change the way we work with our staff? That should be the center point of our communications, not the confirmed cases in themselves. And also, I'll just end this slide by saying that in this particular moment that we're in, it's that rare circumstance in our communications landscape where it's truly impossible to over-communicate. We can't share more than people need. The appetite for news around COVID and for information about our response to COVID is insatiable. We also have to appreciate that the expectations of those people we serve are sometimes a bit more than it would be our instinct to deliver on. So that is to say that if we're not touching base with our families, if we're not touching base with our prospects, if we're not touching base with our referral sources and our regulators and so on, we want to make sure that they're hearing from us, even if we don't have a ton of information to share, even if we don't yet have confirmed cases. Keep reminding these audiences that we're aware of it, that we're on standby, that we're doing what we can to prepare and to mitigate the circumstances of it, and to keep providing the people in their lives with a rich and rewarding experience. So while we're in this moment of, now we're in this space of managing the moment that we're in, which is continuing to communicate around the COVID cases that we find ourselves getting, it's also time to begin looking ahead to the types of reputational risks we're likely to be facing in the coming weeks, because that will evolve. Right now, it may feel like the only consideration that we have is if we have a confirmed case or if we don't have a confirmed case. That will change. With time will come a lot more hindsight and a lot more reflection on how we handled the crisis as it first confronted us. What reputational risks we're going to face in the community? I've listed some of them here. Allegations that we were negligent in caring for the people to whom we're committed to care. We didn't properly provide space for them to be isolated. We didn't properly encourage social distancing measures when they were becoming, as ubiquitous as they are now. That if someone began to show symptoms, we did not begin masking that individual until they had a confirmed or a presumptive test. Allegations of a lack of transparency, that we hid things from people. There's all sorts of restrictions about the types of information we can share, lest we not wade into personal health information. And that's just sort of one of the difficulties we combat in mitigating this situation. But were we transparent enough with the people we serve? Did they hear information primarily from us, or did they hear information from the media when they should have been hearing it from us? Did we put our employees at undue risk as well as our residents? Did we not provide for them the type of PPE that could have been in some ways life-saving? I know there's a national shortage of PPE and masks in particular. We have to judge how that will look in hindsight. Did we take the types of precautions we could have? Did we give families access during those pivotal, heaven forbid, those pivotal end-of-life moments that we're going to face that happen either as a result of COVID or just in the normal course of our business? Did we give families access to be with their loved ones? And what did that look like? Did we have a process in place? Did we have the right quarantining and triage measures? All of these are sorts of things that we're going to look back on. And these are the standards to which we will be held in hindsight. And it's time to begin preparing for these scenarios. I'm a big believer, and you don't need someone like me to do it, but I'm a big believer in making sure that you begin to sort of go through the exercise of writing down what would media ask you about this if we failed to do X, and media would ask us why, the letter Y. What would we say in response to that? What would our statement be? What would our message be? What type of letter would we send out to the people that are closest to us to help sort of combat these allegations? Treat these as distinct scenarios that are not just possibilities, but that are also likelihoods, and work to address them in advance, in the abstract, and when we're not staring down the barrel of a true media inquiry. This slide I won't spend too much time on, but I think it really does bear repeating, and bear repeating often. The most important ambassadors that we have as communicators are going to be our frontline and our direct care workers. It does not matter how articulate, how successful, how effective, how clear, how well stated the messages are that are coming out of letterheads, that are coming on letterhead, that are coming with the CEO signature below. It does not matter how how well messaged we are at the top if it's not being carried out or being believed by the people who are these primary ambassadors, these most effective ambassadors, or the opposite side of that, the most powerful detractors. And this is a time when we really want to double down, not only on communicating with our staff, but in caring for our staff, however we can. Let's communicate regularly with them, much like I said on the first slide, even if we don't have a lot of specific information to share. Can we be touching base with them just to emphasize that we value their health, and we value their wellness, and we value their mindfulness, and we want to help combat the uncertainty that they're facing and make sure they're as prepared to do their work as they can. What are we doing to help reduce their exhaustion and their sense of isolation? In terms of the tactics we use in communicating, generally speaking, one of the least effective ways to communicate during difficult times is email. And letters. They are ubiquitous, they're widely used, they are sometimes our only option, but they are completely devoid of humanity. And we want to find ways in which we can, show and reiterate to these individuals that we're not just saying that we care, but we're demonstrating that we care. Whether that's ways to be with people in person by doing things like rounding through our facilities, whether that's hosting things like virtual town halls, whether that's coming up with a list of just people that we care about, or people in our workforce that we give a personal phone call to at home every once in a while just to check in and see what they're doing. I cannot overestimate the power of these touch points. Showing that humanity will go so far toward helping our internal audiences amplify the most important messages we have to say. And of course, we're always sensitive to the notion that whatever we say internally may in fact end up with the media, but that's okay, as long as we can stand behind it, as long as it's sincere, and as long as it's genuine. I think we're ready to take that risk. But find those ways to show that humanity, to show that compassion, and not just say that humanity and say that compassion. I'll end on this note here on just my little communications piece. But we're getting a lot of questions about what we can do to sort of keep the drumbeat of our public relations program or our marketing program alive. We want to keep that drum pounding, but media are completely distracted. Media are reporting about nothing but COVID, and I'll make what is, I guess, a half joke, but very much a reality of our marketing programs, which is to say that now is not the time to invite a news crew in to videotape our 100th birthday celebration. We know that, and we know that that's majorly disruptive. It disrupts our marketing efforts. It disrupts our communications. It disrupts the goodwill of the staff and residents and others within our communities. So we want to be sensitive to that. What can we do when we don't have access to conventional media? Well, I like to champion focusing on those longer lead time opportunities, right? What can we say to people that are perhaps not asking work of them, because these newsrooms that have shrunk beyond measure in recent years simply don't have the resources to devote to giving us editorial consideration outside of COVID. So we look at things like op-eds, and we look at things like offering byline articles to our media outlets that we work with. We look at ways in which we can sort of do the work for them and give them the content they need without, again, taxing their resources. We can also look at longer lead time opportunities. Sometimes writing articles is a process that takes weeks, getting them accepted and getting them published, and that's okay. It's okay to put those things in the queue that are going to take a little bit longer to sort of cultivate and ferment and fully form. Again, it's not time for the 100th birthdays, but there are some angles we can continue to pursue, even under the umbrella of COVID. We can focus on the ways in which we as an institution are living and embodying our values, even in crisis times. If you're operating in one of the states that's on heavy lockdown right now, as many are and as all should be, how are we continuing to provide a meaningful and rich experience for our residents, for our seniors, even when we're sort of shutting out the outside world? What's it like on the inside? What's the quality of life? What's the experience like? How are these individuals coping with interpersonal isolation when social ties is such a key selling point of the experience? How are we being high touch in this experience? How are we being rich? How are we being value based? How are we being compassionate? So there's opportunities there. There's angles there. We don't have to avoid COVID-related topics altogether, but we don't want our only representation in the media to be, how many cases do we have, and how embattled are we, and how low on masks are we? We can focus on experiential pieces. And I'll end on this note here. There will be a return to normalcy at some point, as far as media are concerned. It does not have to be when we are completely past the curve concept, but it is likely to be when we start coming down on the other side of the curve concept. Media operations will return to normal. We will have opportunities to engage with them again, and the appetite for content that is non-COVID will go from one extreme to the other. It will be insatiable appetite for all things COVID that turns into insatiable appetite for all things that are non-COVID related. Let's be ready. Let's have some. Forgive the metaphor, but let's have some ammo in the chamber here that we can begin to push out as soon as that switch flips. So we can be queuing up stories. We can be working on longer lead time opportunities. We can make the work of our friends in the media just a bit easier and keep that sort of drumbeat of thought leadership going, even though they're not coming out to film that birthday cake being blown out. So, and I'll turn it back over to Melissa.
Thank you, Chris. A lot of good information. And so we're going to switch gears over into marketing. And when it comes to marketing, the first thing that we're doing for our clients and that we would recommend to you all is making sure that you understand and have an inventory of all of your assets that are currently in market, whether that's advertising or other peripheral pieces. So when it comes to ads, making sure that you are pulling an inventory of anything that's a social ad, display, print, radio, TV, billboards, direct mails that you have in process and things like that, as well as any associated assets that those point to. So if you have an ad that it points to a URL that goes to a landing page, making sure that you're assessing that landing page as well. And so depending on the size of your community and your advertising plan or your marketing plan, you may have some of these channels, just a few of them, you may have all of them and more. So the scale of the inventory will be dependent on your community and your market and the advertising that you're doing. Also, don't forget things, sort of non-ad pieces like database emails or things that are automatically triggered, like a drip email or some sort of behavioral based email or text message. So depending on how sophisticated you are in terms of marketing automation, there may be some things that are being triggered out into the market based on time or people's behavior. And so you'll want to make sure that you assess them as well. And as well as including your website, looking particularly at any calls to action that you might have, thank you pages and things like that, and really assessing all of those things from both or from a service line perspective, looking at the viability of the placement, which we'll dive a little bit deeper into, as well as the relevance of the messaging. So when we talk about assessing your current marketing from those three things, when we talk about service lines, we're really talking about, are there products or services where you're not currently accepting new residents or admissions? For example, some of our clients aren't accepting new people for adult day or outpatient rehab. And so we might want to allocate budget that's currently going to those services to other services. So for example, we see that some of our clients might have increased demand for AL or personal care or enhanced living, depending on the license in your state. And so there may have been other services that were serving as a bridge or helping to delay someone's move, and now there is an increased need for those higher levels of care. And so that might be an opportunity where you want to reallocate budget to focus on where there is additional interest in those service lines. When we talk about the placement, we're really talking about where do your ads physically appear. If they are somewhere where people are unlikely to be, like a train station or a sporting arena, are you able to negotiate pausing them or changing your run dates or adding some additional time to your run, hopefully when people are not social distancing and are out and about? Are you advertising in any sort of event-related or cultural venue like the symphony or a theater? And if so, those events might not be running. So we would encourage you to reach out to any reps that you have, or if you have an agency partner, that they can do that on your behalf, and make sure to negotiate changes in the contracts that you already have in place, and alternative recommendations so that, as I mentioned earlier, you can really minimize any financial impact and continue to keep your prospects engaged and moving forward in the sales process. And then when it comes to messaging, we'll want to look at what are the calls to action. Do any of those need to change? So for instance, we have an example on the screen where we had an email that said schedule a tour, click to schedule, and then we've modified that to really focus on the different ways that people can connect with the team that aren't necessarily coming in for a tour, and inviting them to take a virtual tour. So similarly, if you have any content assets that you're inviting people to download, you may want to consider switching them to something that's more topically relevant, like financial benefits of your community or activities that people can do while they're isolated at home. Those may net you some better results and better interests. And Kimberly, in a couple of slides, is going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into messaging as well. So I'm going to focus here on meeting people where they are in terms of the placements. I talked a little bit on the previous slide of placements that you may want to shift away from, but what would you want to shift to? So we all know that people are at home, and that means that they're on their phones, they're on their computers, they're looking at Facebook, they're Googling, they are looking at news websites, they're checking email, they're listening to music. And so we looked at the performance of some of the placements that we have in market for the first half of March compared to the first half of February. And we see a couple of opportunities, one of them being organic social media. So organic meaning the posts that your organization makes that aren't ads. Clicks to your website from organic social are up 156% month over month. And people are looking at more pages than usual each visit and staying on your website almost 50% longer. So when you're considering what to post, remember what Chris said about the 100th birthday party. You want to be careful in choosing the topics that you want to cover. How are you enhancing your residents' lives during this period? What are the ways in which you are serving the wider community in which your community exists? These are the types of content from an organic perspective that are going to be much better received than things that are purely promotional, like announcements about awards or things like that. When we look at email, it's almost a 300% increase in sessions to your site, meaning that people are clicking through to visit your site. And while the percentage, on a percentage basis, the pages per session and the session duration is lower on an absolute basis because 300% more people are there. It's a much higher volume of people. And then from a paid perspective, you see the display data along the bottom there. We see that people are engaging with display ads. So those are the ads that appear on various websites around the web. 41% more people are seeing the ads, and there are 55% more clicks on them, which equates to a 10% increase in click-through rate. And click-through rate is of the people who are seeing the ads, how many are engaging with them. And just keep in mind overall that the benchmark for display is a little bit less than 0.5%. And so performance is getting close to double the benchmark for display ads. So from a digital perspective, these are the three that we would recommend you take a look at. Of course, you can look at your own Google Analytics and see where you're seeing increases in sessions and where people are engaging with your organization the most. And then looking at traditional placements, there doesn't tend to be a lot of data on traditional placements until after the fact, but we know from historical information that during crises events, whether it's snowstorms or hurricanes or a pandemic, that media users tend to ramp up their media consumption to stay informed, to kill time, to find solace, to stay in touch with others. And so here's some information from Nielsen about two such events. So we're showing one on a snowstorm in January 2016. And you can see that comparing the Saturday of that event to the prior Saturday, the total TV usage was about 45% higher. And then similarly, during Hurricane Harvey, again, according to Nielsen, there was a 56% increase of total TV usage compared with the preceding period and 40% higher than the period following the storm. And so our recommendation would be not only look at traditional TV, but also streaming services like YouTube or Hulu, particularly if you're targeting younger boomers or adult children. And then similarly, radio and music streaming. And from a streaming perspective, we would recommend Pandora over Spotify. We tend to see more older adults using Pandora as their streaming music provider of choice. So with that, I will hand it over to Kimberly to talk about messaging and content.
Okay, great. Thank you, Melissa, and good afternoon, everybody. I am going to pick up where Melissa left off. Melissa just spoke to us about where to focus much of your marketing efforts in today's times. And I'm going to focus on the messaging that she referenced and some messaging content. So the first thing I would share with you is that you certainly want to make sure, as Chris already discussed, that your messaging is realistic to the situation at hand. And we would suggest that hiding from it, continuing a hard push, or not acknowledging it will not resonate with your audiences. So really acknowledging what's going on and being open to conversation about it and transparent, as Chris had mentioned, is going to be very important. Secondly, as Melissa mentioned, people are at home. And I don't think we're going to have another opportunity like this. I hope we don't, in so much as there is no time like the present to connect your call outs and be that resource and share the benefits of your community and our field and what you are doing for your residents, all of which will reignite and reinstall the confidence that prospects and or depositors already made by turning to you and their decision to make a commitment to your community. So as we dive into messaging content, the first recommendation we would make is certainly to align your calls to action with what is being allowed or offered at your community. And I think this example that we have here on the screen is a perfect example of how important that alignment is and how important it is to stay current on that alignment, referencing back to the audit that Melissa talked about, the continual audit of all of your marketing assets. You'll notice here that this message was put up late last week on behalf of one of our clients, saying that we remain open for appointments and our housing consultants are also available by video, email, and phone. And as Chris referenced, things change much faster than 24 hours. By this past Monday morning, as in yesterday morning, this was out of date. So certainly keep your calls to action aligned and current as often as possible. And then share that content through a variety of mediums, virtual consultations, offering virtual mediums, video tours, webinars, certainly giving new platforms for which people can connect. We are having experiences with Google Hangout, with Zoom, other meeting places like GoToMeeting and Facebook Live. And be sure that when you're doing this, that you leverage your website assets and assets that you have on your website, any videos you have, any photo montages that you have, and also leverage the resources that your community is providing your residents. And certainly think about those resident testimonials that you might be hearing in the moment as you're going around supporting your resident population. When we think about financial concerns, we can certainly leverage lessons from the past when many of us were on the provider side and around in 2008 and other past economic crises, albeit these crises in hindsight now were simpler and less dimensional than the complexity of this COVID crisis is. But if you think back to those times, experience during those times proved to us that those who leaned into the issue and didn't shy away from addressing it head on came out least unscathed and came out with most occupancy and sales and able to resume that momentum that they enjoyed prior sooner than others. So we want to address the fact that yes, people are going to be scared of what's going on with their investments. And at the same time, you can help them understand the value and stability that your community offers. You certainly can't promise them improved returns, but you can offer stability and value for their dollar and protecting their assets and having their money work for them and plan for their future. Entrance fee communities have a particular advantage, especially if your entrance fees have refundability. That will protect their assets and go back to their estate or family, while ensuring and protecting them from market rates, especially if you offer a type A or type B contract, where you are protecting from market rates for future care. Regardless, this investment is offering future care, future access to known care, supplies, healthcare, knowing where you're getting your support from. And thirdly here, the last point on the slide, you can't forget too, you also have the opportunity here to leverage the ability to access equity in the real estate market today, given where things are. So lots of ways to address the financial concerns head on and reassure your residents, your prospects and your depositors on pursuing this or the decision that they've already made. As we continue with messaging and content, there's also an opportunity to develop personal connections and show interest, that humanity that Chris talked about, show interest and support when you are reaching out to your prospects and depositors. And while you're doing so, you are getting the added benefit of helping to overcome any reputational or media risk that this crisis has brought about. We knew even before this crisis began that regardless of the progress in our industry and the advances in industry nomenclature, the general public who may not be as familiar with our field still affiliates our CCRCs, our independent livings, our assisted livings with nursing homes only. And we all know in today's day and age that every care level, the nursing care level, the healthcare care level, independent living, assisted living, all offer way more than what traditional public perception might have in today's world. So leverage your current communal efforts to highlight the benefits of being in a community and be a resource to the greater community in your marketing efforts. So how do you do that? Focus on the benefits existing residents are getting going through an experience like this with others. Leverage those in your marketing efforts. Bring some of that reassurance forward to your prospects and depositor community when you're able to. So if activities are being provided virtually to your residents, share some of those links with your prospects and depositors. Share the activities that your lifestyle leaders are delivering to your residents. Remind others of the communal access and provision for food supplies that your residents have. Leverage how the community is still providing and encouraging alternative social connections and the close proximity to help and known healthcare support. And you can see Melissa's been toggling through this. Here's one community that is sharing with the world in their posts, in their digital posts, how they are making sure there's connection between residents and family members and among residents. And in the prior one, how people are actually visiting and adding to community by singing outside of the community. So leverage those pieces in your marketing. That's the type of content you would want to include there. Don't forget those testimonials that I mentioned prior, and make sure that more than anything, you are changing your focus from a hard press to a resource through your marketing to the general public. A couple of other considerations to think about here. Regarding the messaging, you don't want to forget about depositors. I've mentioned them periodically throughout this. Both depositors who have already scheduled move-ins and your pre-sale depositors. Current or near-term move-ins may not be able to happen. How are you going to retain those depositors? Can you create community with them? Just like you might create community, as we discussed prior, with your leads through virtual opportunities. Don't forget that during this time of social distancing, we are seeing phone calls answered at a rate that is at least double the usual rate. So engage in those opportunities, dial those phones, go back to the basics and remind your depositors, not only remind them, but build on why they originally decided to call you, why they committed to you, address their concerns, and again, share and reinforce the stability of an investment in your community. There are also some considerations to address that we can't solve through communications or marketing or sales alone, but certainly they are some considerations that your operation in general may face. And so we thought we would put them out there. What do delays in move-ins mean for the contractual obligations? Is there a way to adjust those contractual obligations for those who are experiencing delays in move-ins simply due to having access and having to be in social distancing? What impact does that have on the operation for your realized revenue? The other thing that people might not have readily on their minds yet, but certainly should be thought about, is how long your applications are valid. Many independent livings or CCRCs, as we all know, have contracts that stipulate move-in within 30 or 60 days of application or contract signing. Now, in today's world, 30 or 60 days is an eternity. That time period is now considered long. Whoever thought we would have said that. And someone who filled out an application at the end of February, what their application looks like and how their portfolio has changed now that it's the end of March or the middle of March could have changed drastically and had a big impact on the assets reflected in that original application. So what is the shelf life of your prospect's application? How often do residents, in fact, not just prospects, but residents update their financials? Especially in the not-for-profit world, those of you who are with us that are in the not-for-profit world, where many of us have benevolent funds and need to understand the liability we have with our populations. What is the financial impact on the community's liability obligation with the recent financial turn of events? How often are we keeping up with the liability and the condition of each of our residents' financial portfolios? The bottom line message we want to conclude with at the end of this marketing session is that we may need to change how we are marketing, but there is a large opportunity to nurture and most importantly, support those who have turned to us. We can enhance the reputation and perceived value of community living and leverage the value in such an investment. This is our opportunity to continue to connect and build affinity and trust and loyalty in our communities, in our organizations, and in the brand that we represent. We have a captive audience sitting in their homes. There's no better time to connect with them, to position all for the future when we do come out of these circumstances. So definitely take advantage of that time to be that nurturing resource for your prospects. As we wrap up in the next few minutes, I would be remiss to not acknowledge and thank each of you on the call for the passion and dedication with which you are serving through these difficult times. A lot of us are on the front lines, a lot of us are exposing ourselves, and certainly we appreciate what you are doing. And each of you are doing acts of heroics every day, and our communities, our greater communities, and the field in general is certainly indebted to you. So really wanted to thank you for that, and also thank you for spending some time today to hopefully get some insight and some thoughts to keep the momentum going. So to that end, as we wrap up here right before we go into questions, Creating Results wants to offer you some complimentary support during this time. And you'll see a couple different offers on this slide here. Creating Results is offering a 1-hour complimentary strategy or marketing review session with those of you who have been on the call and would like one. You can access and schedule your community session by visiting bit.ly/schedulewithcr, as you see here on the slide. And I'm also going to turn it over to Chris for him to share what Ann Klein Communications is offering.
Yeah, that's my contact information on the slide. We'd be happy to give you some guidance as you're sort of rethinking your public relations strategy, as well as navigating this very difficult moment in terms of crisis communication. That gets directly to me, and happy to answer any questions and help steer you on the right course.
Excellent. Well, thank you for everyone for participating. And just as a reminder, you can submit questions in the questions panel on the go to webinar control panel. We have a couple of questions that have come in, so I'll address some of the just fairly straightforward ones first. One person asked, can you please define PPE? That's personal protective equipment. That was Chris referenced PPE in terms of reputational risk, and is your organization potentially negligent in their providing for personal protective equipment to your employees? So just a factor to consider. Also, the PowerPoint will be available, so we will make both the recording of the webinar as well as the slides available to everyone who registered, as well as put them online. So they will be available for you to use and share, and we welcome you to do that. So a couple of the less straightforward questions. One of them is, you mentioned possible reputational risks for the perception of actions we're taking today. How do you recommend addressing these missteps internally if we see them happening, especially if they're coming from leadership? So I guess I'll hand that over to you, Chris.
Yeah, that question cuts, thank you for that question. That question cuts right to the core of public relations, which is to say that public relations is not about spinning things. It's not about representing things a certain way. Public relations is about communicating good work done well. And if we don't spin problems away, we deal in the realities of what we're actually facing. So if we are seeing, the best thing we can do is, if we're seeing risks being perpetuated, if we're seeing actions that we think might pose reputational risk later, the best thing to do would just be to sort of raise a flag on it. The best thing to do, and perhaps the only thing we can do, is to say, listen, I understand that this is a consideration we have to make because of X, but I want to help you think through the type of reputational risk this can pose later on. All of these marketing decisions, the sustained business operations, depend on our continued goodwill among the people that we serve, and it's important for us to flag that shortcomings in operation, shortcomings in action pose those threats later down the road. Sometimes people just aren't thinking that way. Sometimes they're just not seeing things through the crystal ball the way we quite like them to. And I wish there was sort of a magic bullet for addressing these, but there isn't. The best thing we can do is point out reputational risks and potential reputational risks as soon as we see them.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Another question, some of our staff is concerned that they will get pulled into direct care situations. Any tips on how to manage our marketing team if they get cut to bare bones? So Kimberly, I guess I'll direct that one to you.
Okay, sounds like being pulled into direct care. I think the bare bones marketing question was it the crux of this one, I'm hoping. And I would say there that continuing to do what you can to call the bare bones staff that is left to call and nurture your prospects and be in front of your prospects and nurturing those relationships by sharing what is going on and sharing the good parts of what's going on, of the various benefits that your residents are receiving, how they can receive those as well, and continue to offer them solace and comfort and reassurance in their decision, and keep the phones going with the staff that is left on the marketing premises. The other thing too, I think, is that for those of you that can't be on the phones, if you're conducting these audits right now and looking at the positioning and the messaging that needs to be happening, then hopefully the couple people that are left in the not giving the direct care can be keeping at least the marketing tactics going too, to be representing your community and getting that communication out. I'm not sure if there's anything else you would add on the marketing side of that, Melissa.
I was thinking as you were speaking that I might look at performance and try to, in the absence of the full amount of time that you might have and the short amount of time that you may have to dedicate to marketing, obviously focusing your efforts on the things that are netting the most performance for you. So whether those are the tactics that are netting the most inquiries for you, or they are most effective in nurturing or keeping people engaged, I think I would switch gears and really try to leverage those particular ones that are sort of what matters most in the moment. And if you have any partners who are working with you, trying to leverage them to take some things off your plate and provide additional support to the extent that you are able as well could be helpful. So another.
Yeah, I'm just going to chime in real quick and just say to that one point. We want to prepare for members of our team to be distracted and pulled into direct care situations, but let's also just be candid. We want to prepare for significant amounts of sick time among our teams as well. There's with this virus cresting and being exposed the way that it is, it's entire and with the recommendations that affected individuals be quarantined for 14 days being sort of on the low end of what the needs are. It's quite likely that we will have major disruptions to our team, both in terms of the service that we're doing and the sick time. So let's keep these programs as self-sustaining and able to be maintained by very bare bones teams for quite a while.
Good point, Chris. And I think that kind of highlights also the need for any cross training as you have an opportunity now, even though it may seem like a significant investment of time. If there are things that only one person on your team knows how to do or regularly does, it might be a good opportunity to make sure that there's backups for all key marketing functions or other functions, to make sure that if there are people who are using sick time or who need to be away or pulled into other situations, that you have people who can help you with those functions as well. So I think we'll do one more last question, and we're getting a lot of requests for interviews. When should we be willing to put someone in front of a camera? So Chris, I think that one is for you as well.
Yeah, I'll tackle that one. Thank you. The default position tends to be, let's issue a statement, let's put things in writing, and I'm not opposed to that. I think there's great value in being precise in our language. There's great value in making sure that the language we intend to say is going to get past the gatekeeper in a true, undiluted fashion. So I'm all for statements most of the time. I think when we get to that I was talking earlier about sort of this moment of advanced reputational risks where we're being potentially accused of negligence or or lack of compassion or lack of transparency. I think in those situations, it's probably going to be more practical that we're saying, is this a moment to put my CEO or my executive director or someone on camera? Because you do that when you want to demonstrate institutional compassion and institutional humanity, which statements just fail to do. I mean, you see it on the news all the time. A statement from Home Depot said that Home Depot deeply regrets, and you just say to yourself, it's not possible for Home Depot to be personified in such a way. It's not possible for them to be compassionate and contrite. So when you get to those moments, you need a face, you need a human who can convey those empathetic type emotions. And I think that moment is going to come. We're probably not there yet. And I think by and large, unless we want to really advocate for a cause or really put a face behind something like a push to donate masks to a local community, we're probably okay doing most of our communications and our public relations in writing for now. Be nimble, as I think when we get into those deeper reputational risks, my counsel on that would change. And I caution that this is a very time-stamped webinar. We need the flexibility to rethink this counsel as this very strange and very unlike anything else moment continues to evolve.
Excellent. And as things continue to evolve, if you have questions that you didn't occur to you now, or you didn't have the opportunity to ask, please feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to help in any way that we can. We appreciate everyone joining us here today, and you will see the recording and the slides shortly. So thank you all for joining, and we hope you have a good rest of your afternoon.